Take a look at this picture. I'll just leave it up here for a few seconds so you can take it in. What we are looking at is a mountain of bison skulls, piled up outside the Michigan Carbon Works in Rougeville, Michigan, 1892. Now, how you react to this image could vary, but what I see are the negative consequences of manifest destiny and westward expansion in the 19th century, that's the 1800s. During this century, the population of American bison dropped from anywhere between 30 to 60 million down to only 456. That's right, tens of millions of bison down to only 456 of them. So for today's AFOUT Mini, let's talk about the history behind this image. First, a quick note on bison. Though you might sometimes hear people call them buffalo, technically they are not buffalo. There aren't any buffaloes in the Americas. We have bison, which are much fluffier up top and don't have that heavy horned plate on their heads, just those sharp horns emerging from the fuzz. Bison also have that characteristic hump, while buffalo don't. And in general, bison live in colder climates, like the plains, while buffalo prefer warmer climates. So for this episode, it's all about the American bison, our native wild bovine friend. And in fact, the only native bovine species in the US. The cows that we use as livestock originally came from Europe. And while I'm already on a bison tangent, here's some more fun facts about the American bison. Its scientific name is bison bison. You could actually make it bison bison bison, because that's the genus, the species, and the subspecies. It's the largest native mammal in North America. Male bulls can weigh up to 2,000 pounds and can be 6 feet tall, where female cows can be around 1,000 pounds and 4 to 5 feet tall. And the baby calves can weigh 30 to 70 pounds at birth. And speaking of the babies, they're born with this cute orange-red color, which changes to the standard dark brown after a few months. And that's also when their hump and their horns start to grow. I mean, just look at this adorable little baby. I just want to give it a cuddle. I'm not going to. Don't touch wild bison. But they're very cute. And finally, they're really fast. Sure, they're big and beefy, pun sort of intended, but they can run up to 35 miles per hour, and they can spin around quickly and jump fences, and they're strong swimmers. To put that into perspective, the current record for the fastest human running speed is roughly 28 miles per hour, and that's not even sustained over a long distance. That's just the fastest speed any one man has run. So the bison will outrun you. Again, please do not approach a wild bison. Don't be like the Taurons of Yellowstone. But despite the majesty of our big, beautiful indigenous bison, they were no match for the world's apex predator, man. So in preparation for today's mini, I went hunting for an original text source that is contemporary to the period, something from the 1800s that gives us perspective on what happened to the bison population. And I stumbled upon a book from 1889, The Extermination of the American Bison by William T. Hornaday, who was the superintendent of the National Zoological Park. Well, it's more of a report, really, but a book will do. And there's even an inscription inside the copy that I read that said, "To Teddy Roosevelt, with the compliments of the author," which is awesome. Context. This was before Teddy Roosevelt became president in 1901. So why did not yet President Teddy Roosevelt receive this book on bison? On a bison hunting trip in 1883, Teddy gained a new appreciation and love for them and became a conservationist. And he would later go on to form the American Bison Society in 1905 with the author of the aforementioned book. And the mission was to save the dwindling bison population. It's always nice when you see one of our legendary presidents supporting a cause like this. America is a beautiful country, and we need to be proactive in protecting it. Teddy Roosevelt thought so, at least. He was known as the conservationist president because he did more than any other president to date to protect public lands. Now, this book, which is linked in the description, is a really fascinating read. The author has experience hunting bison, and he certainly knows his stuff. And in the introduction, he outlines the point of the report. Quote, "It is hoped that the following historical account of the discovery, Partial utilization and almost complete extermination of the great American bison may serve to cause the public to fully realize the folly of allowing all of our most valuable and interesting American mammals to be wantonly destroyed. The wild buffalo is practically gone forever, and in a few more years, when the whitened bones of the last bleaching skeleton have been picked up and shipped east for commercial uses, nothing will remain of him save his old, well-worn trails along the watercourses, a few museum specimens, and regret for his fate." End quote. And see how he refers to it as a buffalo there, not a bison? He even puts in his book, "I know it's a bison, but people call it buffalo." So anyway, it doesn't matter. He then goes on to outline the history of the species, including everything we know about their character, their attributes, their habits, their diets, their disposition, their economic value, and how they've been exterminated. And we already know how so many of them were killed. They were hunted for their skin and meat. But my primary concern is, why so many at once? So my bigger question is, essentially, what is the historical context of this image? Why are there so many skulls? So let's go back to the two defining events I mentioned earlier, Manifest Destiny and westward expansion. Manifest Destiny was the idea that the United States and its citizens were destined to expand across North America, taking all of the land for themselves. And the idea was rooted in American exceptionalism, the idea that we are the best, so this land should be ours. Never mind that it belonged to others first. And as a result of Manifest Destiny, we see rapid westward expansion. It led to the US going to war with Mexico in 1845 in order to take California, and it was also a reason for the US annexing Texas in the same year. And regardless of how you feel about it, it also led to the forced removal and relocation of Native Americans from their lands, who were then moved into significantly smaller tribal boundaries, sometimes far away from their ancestral homes. This began with the Indian Removal Act of 1830 and carried on throughout the rest of the 19th century with things like the Indian Appropriations Act of 1851 and the Dawes Act of 1887. I'm going to be doing a full-length pod episode on the Trail of Tears at some point in this calendar year, which happened in this same period of time from roughly 1830 to 1851 as a result of the Indian Removal Act. Now, once their land was opened up for American expansionism and settlement, we moved in. And the American bison, seen as a prime economic commodity, was hunted nearly to extinction. But this picture seems to suggest that men were killing the bison for more than just their meat or hide. It's hard to estimate how many skulls we're looking at here, but it's clearly an excessive amount. So was the bison hunt about more than just their economic value? Hornaday certainly thought so. Part of his report details the systematic slaughter of bison, and he writes that, quote, "In no way does civilized man so quickly revert to his former state as when he is alone with the beasts of the field. Give him a gun and something which he may kill without getting himself in trouble, and presto, he is instantly a savage again, finding exquisite delight in bloodshed, slaughter, and death, if not for the gain, then solely for the joy and happiness of it." End quote. That's a pretty damning passage. He goes on to explain how it happened so quickly, a combination of rapid westward expansion and also railways, which made it easier for people to get out into the plains and hunt. And once that happened, what he calls the universal herd was split into groups, and we enclosed them and started killing them off until they were almost completely gone. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 accelerated this process as well. And like I said in the opening, at the end of the 19th century, when Hornaday wrote this report and Teddy Roosevelt got seriously into bison and conservation efforts, there were only 456 left, down from tens of millions. And of that 456, 256 of them were in captivity in places like Yellowstone National Park, so there were only 200 of them left wild to roam the plains. So this image shows us more than just a growing economy for bison. It was a century of the systematic extermination of one of our indigenous mammal species, and one that almost succeeded. Some experts even believe that the mass extermination of the bison was a calculated attempt to deprive Native Americans of one of their vital resources, helping remove them from Western lands in anticipation of American settlers moving in and taking over. According to Cree filmmaker Tasha Hubbard, a professor at the University of Alberta, exterminating the bison, quote, was seen as the taming of the West, of domesticating this wild space that was needed in order for expansion of settlement. So to remove that keystone species was to weaponize starvation against indigenous peoples, to weaken us in order to control us and remove us from our territories. End quote. It's a bold claim. Are there any contemporary sources that support this argument? Well, yeah, actually. I found one from a General Philip Sheridan who engaged in conflicts against the Southern Plains Indian tribes. Historian Robert Worcester talks about it in his book, The Military and United States Indian Policy. General Sheridan said the following to legislators who were trying to pass laws to protect the bison herds. Quote, hunters are destroying the Indians as commissary, and it is a well-known fact that an army losing its base of supplies is placed at a great disadvantage. For a lasting peace, let them kill, skin, and sell until the buffaloes are exterminated. End quote. And in a letter to a fellow general in 1868, the same general, General Sheridan, wrote another quote. The best way for the government is to now make the tribes poor by the destruction of their stock and then settle them on the lands allotted to them. End quote. And it wasn't just this one guy in his campaign against the Native American enemies. Lieutenant Colonel Dodge told a hunter to, quote, quick quote, kill every buffalo you can, every buffalo dead is an Indian gone. Now, regardless of whether or not you believe this was the plan, the extermination of almost all of our bison certainly made an impact on indigenous populations. Nations that relied on the bison for its meat and hides, either as a matter of survival or for cultural reasons, suffered immensely. And research has shown that they fared significantly worse than nations who were not as reliant on bison for survival, as you might expect. And just in case you were wondering, yes, of course, Native American populations did hunt bison as well, but the numbers would not have made as much of a difference compared to what was happening with the planned extermination. Hornaday notes that Native Americans hunted less than 100,000 annually, which is nothing compared to the entire population at its height, somewhere between 30 to 60 million of them. Now, in recent studies, historians and researchers have been looking into the numbers. Losing tens of millions like that in 1 century seems almost impossible. Could there have been other factors other than straight-up bison warfare? Yeah, of course, right? Diseases, in addition to direct human action, might also have killed millions. A 2018 study titled Reinterpreting the 1882 Bison Population Collapse by Sierra Dawn Stoneberg Holt notes that an epidemic might make the numbers make sense. Dr. Stoneberg Holt points to epidemic diseases such as tick fever or anthrax, and that could certainly be a possibility as well. We certainly know the devastating impact that microbes can have on populations. But there's still some back and forth on that front. So, this picture, taken outside a refinery that processed the bison's bones for use as charcoal and glue and fertilizer, tells us a lot about our expansionist history, our relationship with the Native Americans, and our growing and insatiable capitalist economy in the 19th century. And luckily, conservation efforts by men like Hornaday and the great Teddy Roosevelt halted the complete extermination of the American bison. Today, there are around 20,500 in conservation herds and around 420,000 in commercial herds. They're no longer threatened with extinction, but they do face other problems, like a loss of genetic diversity, which is something the National Wildlife Federation is actively working to fix by trying to establish more herds in different places. But at least, for now, images like this are a thing of the past. It's important to protect our beautiful American natural wilderness through endeavors like national parks and conservation projects. We've done it with the bison. We did it with another undeniably American symbol, the bald eagle, and we need to continue to protect our uniquely American heritage by preserving our natural environment. My name is Kelly Beard, and thank you for listening to this AF-Out mini on the Bison Skull Mountain. If you enjoyed this episode, go check out some of my other minis, or my longer podcast episodes, which drop every other Sunday. Sources for this episode are in the description, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any more bloody, gross, mysterious, or weird stories from history.